Moving out to a quiet rural area was supposed to be a fresh start. No more noisy neighbors, no cramped driveways, no ridiculous rules telling me what color I could paint my house. Just peace, quiet, and land as far as the eye could see. That was until I found out the hard way that even in the middle of nowhere, HOA, Karen, find a way to make your life difficult. The first time I met her, she showed up unannounced on my property, clipboard in hand, with a tight scowl that looked like it had been permanently engraved onto her face. "This road is for residents only," she snapped, glaring at my truck as I pulled into my driveway. "You can't just drive on it like it's your personal highway." I raised an eyebrow. "I live here. This is my driveway, my property, my land." Karen's lips pursed into a thin line. "All roads in this community fall under HOA jurisdiction. You need to submit a request for access like everyone else." I let out a short laugh, thinking she had to be joking. "This road was built by the previous owner. It's private property. The HOA has nothing to do with it." "That's not what our community guidelines state," she said, tapping her clipboard. "If you don't comply, we'll have to take further action." I waved her off, slamming my truck door behind me. Big mistake. The next morning, I walked outside and immediately noticed something was off. My truck sat in the driveway, completely normal, but a few feet down the road, gleaming metal spikes jutted out from the gravel. I blinked, thinking maybe I was seeing things. Nope. Karen had installed spike strips on my own driveway. I stormed down the road, stopping just short of the twisted metal teeth. These weren't cheap either. Professional-grade tire shredders bolted straight into the dirt, the kind law enforcement might use to stop a high-speed chase. My blood boiled. This wasn't just petty HOA nonsense. This was straight-up illegal. I pulled out my phone, snapping multiple pictures from every angle, making sure I had undeniable proof of what she had done. If she thought she could get away with this, she had severely underestimated me. I sent the pictures to my lawyer, Matt, and within minutes, he called me back with a mix of shock and fury in his voice. "This is completely illegal," he said firmly. "You need to file a police report immediately." I didn't need to be told twice. I drove straight to the sheriff's office and handed over my phone, letting them scroll through the evidence. The deputy on duty, a grizzled man who had probably seen his fair share of nonsense, let out a long sigh. "Spike strips. On your own driveway. That's a new one." He asked me a few basic questions before shaking his head. "We'll have someone come out and take a look. But if she refuses to remove them, it might have to go through civil court." I nodded, but deep down, I knew Karen wasn't going to back down so easily. When I got home, she was already standing near the spike strips, arms crossed, watching me like she had been waiting. "Hope you're not planning on driving over those," she said, a smug grin on her face. "Wouldn't want to damage your tires." I clenched my jaw, keeping my voice steady. "You installed these on my property without permission. That's destruction of private property." Karen scoffed. "You're mistaken. These are placed here for the safety of the community. HOA rules clearly state that all non-compliant roads must have proper traffic control measures." I gestured toward the strips. "These are not traffic control measures. These are illegal tire shredders." She shrugged. "That's your opinion. The board approved them." My phone buzzed. A message from Matt. "Already filed a temporary restraining order. If she refuses to remove them, she's looking a lawsuit." I turned the screen toward Karen, letting her read it. Her smirk faded just slightly. "This isn't over," she muttered, before storming back toward her house. Later that evening, I heard a loud clanking sound outside. I peeked out the window to see two men, likely hired by Karen, using drills and bolts to secure the strips even deeper into the ground. My chest tightened. She wasn't just refusing to remove them. She was doubling down. I grabbed my phone and started recording, making sure to document everything. The next morning, the sheriff's deputy arrived, stepping out of his patrol car with a weary expression. "You weren't kidding," he muttered, staring at the spike strips. He walked up to Karen's door and knocked. A moment later, she emerged, feigning innocence. "Can I help you, officer?" The deputy wasted no time. "You've been ordered to remove the spike strips immediately." Karen folded her arms. "I have board approval." The deputy sighed. "That's funny, because I just got off the phone with the county commissioner, and it turns out this road isn't under HOA jurisdiction at all." Karen's expression flickered for just a second, but I saw it, the first crack in her confidence. She quickly masked it with a forced smile, folding her arms tighter across her chest. I don't see how that changes anything, officer. This is a private community, and the HOA has every right to enforce its regulations. The sheriff's deputy raised an eyebrow. Let me make this clear. You placed an unauthorized obstruction on a private citizen's property. That is illegal. Karen scoffed. That's debatable. The deputy sighed and pulled out his notepad. Then I suppose we'll let a judge decide. I'm citing you for illegal property modification and hazardous obstruction. You have 24 hours to remove the spike strips, or I'll be back with a court order. I could see the vein in Karen's forehead twitch, but she kept her composure. Fine, she snapped, spinning on her heel and storming back toward her house. The deputy turned to me. If she doesn't comply, call me. I nodded, but deep down, I knew Karen wasn't going to let this go. That night, just as I was about to head to bed, I heard metallic clanking outside. My stomach dropped. I rushed to the window and saw Karen and two men working under the dim glow of flashlights, pouring something around the base of the spike strips. Concrete. My blood boiled. She wasn't just refusing to remove them. She was making sure they were permanent. I grabbed my phone and hit record, documenting every second of her defiance. The next morning, I sent the footage to Matt, who immediately filed for an emergency injunction. By noon, the sheriff's deputy was back, standing in my driveway with his arms crossed. Karen, he called out, knocking on her door. No response. He knocked again, louder this time. A few seconds later, she appeared, looking completely unbothered. Oh, good morning, officer. Something I can help you with. The deputy held up his phone, playing the footage I had recorded. Care to explain why you ignored a direct order and poured concrete over the spike strips? Karen didn't even blink. I was simply ensuring they were properly installed for safety reasons. The deputy's jaw clenched. Safety reasons? Do you think I'm stupid? These strips were already illegal, and now you've committed destruction of property. I hope you have a good lawyer. Karen's smug expression finally wavered. Wait, let's not be hasty. I'm sure we can work something out. The deputy pulled out a citation slip. You'll have a chance to argue your case in court. But for now, these strips are coming out. If you don't remove them by the end of the day, we will. Karen's face twisted into something ugly, but she didn't argue. As the deputy walked back toward his car, he gave me a knowing nod. I'll check back tomorrow. I watched Karen storm back inside, her perfect plan crumbling. But if I thought she was giving up, I had severely underestimated her. The next morning, I stepped outside expecting to see the spike strips removed, but instead, I found something even worse. Karen had replaced the metal strips with thick, reinforced concrete barriers stretching across the edge of my driveway. I stared in disbelief. She wasn't just ignoring the order, she was doubling down. My phone buzzed. A message from Matt. Whatever you do, don't touch it. Let the sheriff handle it. I exhaled, gripping my phone tightly before snapping several pictures. If she wanted a war, she was about to get one. An hour later, the sheriff's deputy returned, stepping out of his cruiser with an unreadable expression. Karen, step outside, he called, his voice sharp. A moment later, she appeared, feigning surprise. Oh, officer, back again so soon. The deputy pointed to the concrete. You ignored a legal order and escalated the situation. Karen folded her arms. I was simply making improvements to maintain the aesthetic of our community. The deputy's patience was running thin. You had a clear instruction to remove the spike strips, not replace them with something even worse. Karen huffed. I was only trying to ensure proper traffic control. The deputy pulled out his radio. That's it. You're done. I'm calling in a removal crew. These barriers are getting torn out today. Karen's face turned pale. You can't do that. The deputy arched a brow. Watch me. Within 2 hours, a county work crew arrived with jackhammers. As soon as they started breaking apart the concrete, Karen lost it. She stormed toward the workers, shouting about legal action, but the deputy simply stood between her and the crew. If you interfere, I'll arrest you for obstruction, he warned. I stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching her perfect plan crumble to dust, literally. By late afternoon, the barriers were completely gone. The deputy handed Karen a final warning. You're officially banned from making any modifications to this road. Any further violations will result in your arrest. Karen's lips were pressed into a thin line, her rage barely contained. This isn't over, she hissed before stomping back in her house. I watched her go, shaking my head. She had lost, but I knew deep down she wasn't done yet. That night, as I checked my security cameras, I saw her standing at the edge of my property, staring at my truck, her arms crossed tight. My stomach tightened. Whatever she was planning next, it wasn't going to be good. The next morning, my truck was gone. At first, I thought maybe I had parked it somewhere else and just forgotten, but the empty driveway made my stomach drop. My truck had been there the night before, and now it wasn't. I sprinted back inside and checked my security cameras, my hands already shaking with frustration. The footage confirmed my worst fear, Karen. At around 3 a.m., a tow truck had pulled up to my driveway. A man climbed out, hooked my truck up in less than 5 minutes, and drove off. Karen was standing nearby, arms crossed, watching the entire thing unfold like she had personally orchestrated it. My jaw clenched so hard I thought my teeth might break. This wasn't just about HOA rules anymore. This was theft. I grabbed my phone and immediately called the sheriff's office. I need to report a stolen vehicle, I said, my voice tight with anger. The dispatcher asked for details, and I gave him everything: the time, the security footage, and, most importantly, who was responsible. The response was immediate. Within the hour, a deputy arrived, and I played the footage for him. His expression darkened as he watched Karen standing there, completely unbothered, as my truck was illegally taken. That's grand theft auto, he muttered, shaking his head. We're bringing her in. I followed as he marched straight to Karen's door, knocking hard enough to make the windows rattle. A few seconds later, she opened it, still in her robe, holding a steaming cup of coffee like she hadn't a care in the world. "Oh, officer," she said sweetly, "what can I do for you this fine morning?" The deputy wasn't in the mood for games. "We have security footage of you authorizing the illegal towing of a private vehicle." Karen's smile barely faltered. "Oh, that truck was in violation of community regulations. It was improperly parked, and we had it removed." The deputy's eyes narrowed. "On whose authority?" Karen sipped her coffee. "As acting HOA chair, I have the right to enforce parking restrictions." The deputy folded his arms. "Funny, because according to our records, you're no longer the HOA chair." Karen's smugness vanished instantly. The color drained from her face, and she clutched her robe a little tighter. "You can't be serious." "Oh, we're serious," the deputy continued. "And even if you were still the HOA chair, you'd still have no legal right to tow a vehicle from private property without due process. That's called auto theft." I could almost see the wheels turning in her head as she tried to come up with an excuse, but she had nothing. The deputy stepped forward. "Karen McAllister, you're under arrest for grand theft auto." He turned her around and cuffed her, ignoring her sputtering protests. "You can't do this," she shrieked. "I was just enforcing the rules." The neighbors had started to gather by then, watching in silence, their expressions a mix of satisfaction and disbelief. After months of torment, Karen was finally facing real consequences. The deputy guided her toward the patrol car, and as she was pushed into the back seat, her eyes locked onto mine. "This isn't over," she hissed. I said nothing, just watched as the car doors slammed shut. The moment the car drove off, the tension that had gripped the neighborhood for so long finally broke. People started cheering, clapping, shaking hands. A few neighbors even hugged me, thanking me for standing up to her. I smiled, but deep down I knew this wasn't just my victory. It was all of ours. Later that day, the tow yard confirmed that Karen had paid to have my truck impounded under false pretenses. It took a few more hours of paperwork, but by that evening I was driving my truck back home, feeling the most relief I had in months. Sarah was waiting for me when I pulled into the driveway. "It's finally over," she said, shaking her head. I nodded, stepping out and looking around. The ridiculous HOA signs Karen had put up were already being taken down by the remaining board members, desperate to distance themselves from her. I walked over to my front yard and took a deep breath. No more threats. No more fines. Just peace. As the sun began to set, neighbors gathered outside, talking, laughing, sharing stories about their run-ins with Karen. It felt like the neighborhood was healing, like a dark cloud had finally passed. Later that night, as I sat on my porch, sipping a well-earned beer, Sarah joined me, resting her head on my shoulder. "So what's next, Chief?" I chuckled, staring out at the now peaceful street. "We live, we enjoy, and we make sure no one like Karen ever pulls this kind of stunt again." Sarah smiled, squeezing my hand. "Sounds like a plan." And for the first time since moving here, I truly felt at home.